The flames from the fiery stone were still spreading through the forest, the soft emerald leaves and fresh flower buds of new leaf disappearing as the fire snatched at branches and danced across the mossy undergrowth. As the fire raged, it was as though the ground was still trembling from the force of the impact of the star stones. The land itself seemed to continue to shake and tremble. The trees echoed with the sound of screaming cats and startled prey animals as everyone fought to escape the reach of the fire. Oakpaw drew in a deep breath and came up coughing, smoke filling his lungs and making him feel dizzy. Or perhaps it was the clashing memories that swirled around in his head. The falling stones from the sky, the impact, then suddenly being somewhere else. Oakpaw gasped as the memory of the huge waterfall and a peaceful, clover-filled lakeside shattered in his head, mixing in with the sensation of falling among the cold wind of countless stars, and the heat and pain of the wind of the impact tossing him into a boulder. He drew a shuddering breath as he realized he was feeling all of the pain from that blow. His body was sore, and his shoulder felt as though fire itself was burning from within. The fire crackled as it consumed another bush, and panic seized Oakpaw as he watched the fire spread into the moss beds that lined the clan's main sleeping area. Already, the area was unrecognizable, even though just that morning he had been standing there with the others, gathered together to talk through the morning hunting patrol, and to talk about gathering more food for... Mossleaf, Oakpaw gasped, hauling himself to his feet. Lizardpaw, Lionstar, Redkit, Robinkit, Briarstock. Oakpaw coughed as the pain from his shoulder began to overwhelm him, his body trembling with shock. Before he could begin to force himself to move, a shadow appeared in front of him, startling him. He drew back, his eyes wide and glazed with pain, then felt relief crash into his heart like cool water. Dogaze! Stay still, Oakpaw. The small brown medicine cat's voice was firm and calm, despite the fire that roared through the forest behind them. Oakpaw gasped softly as her gaze met his. Rather than be afraid, her green eyes were like smooth circles of gemstones, her gaze unwavering. Another branch exploded into flame somewhere in the camp behind her, and she didn't even twitch an ear. Instead, her attention remained completely focused on Oakpaw. Listen to me carefully. You need to move as little as possible until I can get a better look at you. You may have damaged your spine or hurt your neck. Briarstock said that you were thrown into a rock and... Briarstock! Oakpaw gasped, his body trembling. For some reason, he couldn't stop the trembling, and his paws were quivering under his legs. Briarstock, is he okay? What about the others? Oakpaw hunched his shoulders, drawing rapid breaths in as the shock and fear of the situation began to overwhelm him. Dogaze made a soft sound, a purr, a meow, and Oakpaw blinked as that sensation of cool water flowed over him once again. Numbly, he was aware of Dogaze very, very gently pressing her nose against his flank and sides. To both their surprise, he let out a yowl of pain as she touched his left shoulder. She drew back sharply, and Oakpaw felt a flicker of panic. But when he glanced at her, Dogaze was calm again. She nodded to herself and continued to nose his body over, sniffing at cuts along his back that Oakpaw hadn't even been aware that he had. You've hurt something, all right. Stay here. We're far enough from the fire that you should be safe. What about the others? Oakpaw gasped, finally feeling as though his mind were sliding into place again. Dimly, he was aware that if Dogaze wasn't convinced he was about to die, then he'd be fine. Fine enough, that is, to live up to his responsibilities as a warrior and see to the safety of his clan. Where is... Oakpaw broke off as he caught sight of Briarstock. The dark ginger cat was dragging something that looked like a leafy branch out from the small pond by the medicine den, water streaming down his sides and trailing behind him. Dogaze glanced over her shoulder and nodded, as though unsurprised to see what was happening. He's fine, not injured at all actually, and he's busy building a wet breakway with cattails and fallen branches. He said he saw the two legs do this once, when a fire broke out in the fields by their barns. It should keep the flames from spreading our way. Dogaze turned back to Oakpaw, her eyes narrowing as she studied the cuts on his shoulder, her focus so intense that Oakpaw couldn't bring himself to move. But what about... Oakpaw whispered, his voice sounding young even to himself through the haze of pain and shock. The kits are fine. Silverfang and Honeywish are with them right now, actually. Dogaze murmured, her voice muffled as she looked at the cuts at his side, pulling his long orange fur out of the way so she could work. Red Kit got hit by a branch and trapped in camp for a moment, but Silverfang dove in to rescue him right away. Both of them are a bit dazed, but they'll be fine. They're just kits, Oakpaw mewed, surprising himself. What had his younger siblings done to get caught up in all this? What had any of them done? For just a moment, the memory of a brilliant white cat with starlight in his eyes came back to him. Oakpaw opened his mouth to scream the cat's name in anger, but movement out of the corner of his eye stopped him. He let out a sharp gasp. Dogaze! Dogaze, no! There, by the pond outside of the burning medicine cat den, he could see the unmoving shapes of several cats, including the familiar brilliant orange coat, the same shade as his own, of his father and leader, Lionstar. Curled up beside Lionstar was Crowfeather, his black body oddly deflated as he lay so still. Feeling as though his heart were beyond breaking, Oakpaw forced himself to look at the last cat stretch out on their side, the brown and green mottled fur of his mother, Mossleaf. Beside her crouched Tommy and Squirrelleap, both of whom were covered in soot and crouched over Mossleaf as though in terrible pain. Dogaze, no! Oakpaw mewed again, his voice desperate and full of pain. Dogaze didn't glance behind her, but continued her work on Oakpaw's cuts. Even with the fire raging so close to them, Oakpaw couldn't tear his eyes away from the still figures on the ground beside the pond. Hold still, Dogaze murmured, her voice almost too soft to hear. It is important that you hold still, Oakpaw. I've helped them as much as I can. Mossleaf, Oakpaw meowed, grief making his voice fragile. Dogaze pressed her muzzle hard into Oakpaw's side, and he gasped as he felt the touch of icy water again, though his mind was also crowded by a smoky haze of grief. Dogaze licked Oakpaw briskly on his side, moving on from any open cut that she deemed worthy of ignoring. Mossleaf is... Dogaze hesitated, struggling for words. She took in a lot of smoke and is in shock right now, but she's... Dogaze sighed and drew back, meeting Oakpaw's gaze. Mossleaf isn't dead. I need more time with her before I can see the full extent of her injuries. But Lionstar shielded her from the worst, it seems. Lionstar, Oakpaw whispered softly. Dogaze nodded and flicked an ear, though she still did not turn to look at the injured cats by the pond. Then is Lionstar dead? Oakpaw was dimly aware that he was shaking again, but somehow he felt completely detached from what was happening to his body. Dogaze nodded, her expression unchanging, and for a moment Oakpaw nearly fell onto his side with the shock of her calm acceptance. Lionstar died, but it was only one of his lives. Tommy pushed his way in and was able to drag him out most of the way. Squirrelleap helped, and then they went back for Mossleaf with Briarstock, right before the flames. Dogaze's expression flickered for a moment, and Oakpaw trembled, feeling a sudden intense heat of flames and grief in his heart. Right before the flames claimed the rest of the medicine den, Dogaze murmured, turning her head away from Oakpaw and flicking her tail angrily for the first time. They should have been safe in there! The medicine den of all places! And yet StarClan let this happen! Oakpaw closed his eyes and saw a brief memory of stars falling around him, but it vanished as pain washed over his body and his heart. Then, Lionstar? Lionstar will recover, Dogaze meowed softly. He lost a life saving Mossleaf from the worst of the impact, and he is stunned, but he should wake up soon. It takes a while after a leader loses a life for them to return again. Oakpaw staggered with relief, then drew in a shaky breath to steel himself for the next question. And Crowfeather? Dogaze stared at the ground in front of her for a moment, unmoving. Crowfeather isn't dead, but he's terribly hurt. Her voice was like rock, flat and hard. Dogaze cast a glance over her shoulder at the flames that burned hungrily in the medicine den behind them. I don't think there's anything I can do to help him at this point. Oakpaw moaned softly and curled in on himself for a moment, closing his eyes to the waves of grief. All he wanted to do was wrap himself into a tight ball and cry out until the flames stopped and the pain would ebb away into the oblivion of sleep. But he struggled through his thoughts, pain and memories making his head pound until it felt as though his skull would crack. But that isn't what being a warrior is about. I have to help the clan, however I can, Dogaze, Oakpaw croaked, his voice hoarse from all the smoke. Are we far enough away from the fire? Is there anything? You can rest, Doge said, her voice gentle and soft. The medicine cat lifted her head and nuzzled the young apprentice, carefully keeping away from the scrapes and cuts he had gotten from flying into the boulder. She laid her tail gently against his side and firmly leaned against him, encouraging him to stay in place. You're actually one of the worst hurt, and the best way you can help the clan is by staying put. The fire seems to be dying down, so as long as we stay here, we should be safe. Once it stops, then we'll see what we can do. Oakpaw nodded slowly, then jerked his head up as a sudden thought came to him. Doges! He meowed, his mind clearing as his heart filled with terror. The medicine cat flinched and looked away, as though already knowing what his next question would be. Oakpaw pressed against her, panic flaring. Doges! Where is Lizardpaw? Doge sighed and lowered her head, closing her eyes slowly. Oakpaw, no one knows. Branch Star twisted in the thick ferns, pulling through the grasping branches of the leafy bushes all around him with distaste. After so many seasons living on the open beaches and within the expansive caves of Branch Clan territory, he had forgotten how enclosed and suffocating a forest could feel. The ground under his paws was cold dirt instead of warm sands that had soaked up the sunlight during the day. Branches continued to snag at his tail, and the soothing sound of the ocean waves had been replaced with the disjointed, hushed skittering of the forest prey and mysterious creatures that lurked in the shadows. Branch Star sighed, annoyed at the forest environment, and then frowned to himself. Just what was he doing here? Looking so serious as always, a sleek, smooth voice meowed. Branch Star whipped around, claws stretched in perfect battle stance, at the sound of the intruder. A familiar slim black cat stepped out from the shadows, an amused smile on his face. Oh, look at you! So fierce! What a battle stance! I'm sure that alone is enough to put fear into the hearts of your enemies. Branch Star narrowed his eyes and slowly leaned back, sheathing his claws and forcing his fur down as casually as he could. He couldn't tell if the black cat was taunting him or praising him. Or, most likely, as usual, doing a little of both. What do you want? Now, is that any way to speak to the cat who has helped to guide you to your new home? The black cat purred, not in the least offended by Branch Star's brisk tone. He sat back and gave his paw an experimental lick, then drew it over his ears, seemingly possessing all the time in the world. I just thought I'd check in again and see how Branch Clan is going. I mean, I meant to look in on you sooner, but things have been rather busy here, you see. And no matter what any cat says about these oh-so-dangerous times, I haven't been around so long just to be rushed from pet project to pet project like this. The black cat sighed dramatically, and Branch Star rolled his eyes, turning his head away with disinterest. As before, half the things the black cat said didn't make any sense. Isn't speaking to Star Clan the duty of a clan's medicine cat? Why don't you go bother him in his dreams instead? The black cat paused his licking, jerking his head up in surprise. What medicine? He froze, his entire body tensing. Branch Star drew in a gasp as the cat in front of him suddenly shimmered with shadows, his outline filling in rapidly with flashes of starlight so beautiful it made Branch Star's paws give way. There was a sudden ripple in the air, as though the entire clearing were filled with the rapidly flashing points of starlight, like hundreds of tiny, brilliant white fireflies, and then the light vanished and the darkness crashed back in. The black cat stared at Branch Star, an expression of horror on his face. I have to go, he hissed and turned around, leaping into the bushes without pause. Branch Star rose to his feet, trying to chase after him. Wait! Branch Star! Branch Star! Branch Star jerked his eyes open, his heart pounding. He wasn't in the shadowed clearing anymore. He was in the caves of Branch Clan, lying in his moss bed. Sunlight streamed in from the gaps in the cave walls, and the sounds of the tide told him he had slept long past the usual morning hunt. Blinking in confusion, Branchstar looked up, surprised to find Quail-Eye looming over him with an expression of fear on his face. "Branchstar, quick! Something has happened to Moss Clan!"